You are now entering Nick and Mello's hyperspace.
I'm Nick, and my favorite Padme novel has to be Queen's Shadow. Beautiful cover.
And I am Carmelo. And after my third reading of all these novels, I'm going to say Queen Sparrow. I was really taken with this book.
In our journeys through hyperspace, we examine everything and anything Star Wars from the point of view of two lifelong fans, one young and one old, who came together through the will of the Force.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about the three Padme novels that were written by EK Johnston. I'm going to show you the back right here. And they are, in a way, sort of replicating this sort of notion of we're in the middle of the story, we go back to the story, we go forward in the story, sort of like what happens with the original, the prequel, and the sequel. And so it's really interesting that we're sort of moving in time and talking about different moments in the story of Padme Amidala. Nick and I thought that they were really interesting novels, that they deserved a whole show to talk about them and to share our thoughts and our ideas about the novels.
Yeah, we mentioned them briefly last season when we did the young adult novel episode.
Correct.
We didn't really go into detail because we thought they deserved a whole episode, like Carmelo said. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to kind of dive into them.
We're going to be talking a little bit about the novels in general without any spoilers. We wanted to dedicate a small section of the show sort of talking about it generally, so people can sort of get a sense of the novels and see if they would be interested in reading them. And I think you should. They're really quite wonderful.
I second that.
So what are your general impressions about them, Nick? Like what are the things that strike you about them?
I think I generally enjoy them because I've always enjoyed Padme as a character. I think she's always interesting. The mother of Luke and Leia, big part of the
mother of Luke and Leia,
right?
That's right.
Yeah, and kind of planted the seeds for the rebellion and Bail Organa and Mon Mothma, and just a very interesting character from the moment she appeared on screen in The Phantom Menace to me. So I'm kind of enjoying her getting not just her own trilogy of stories, but also kind of separate from Anakin, most of those stories.
Yes.
Kind of some of them are kind of a character study, kind of who she is, how she was raised, where she comes from, and kind of the relationships that made her who she was when we see her in the films. And with these books do a really good job of kind of filling in those blanks for us and kind of answering some questions that some people have had since 99.
Yes, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Not so far away.
It's really interesting. Before we started recording, Nick and I were talking about Phantom Menace itself and how for both of us, Padme was sort of one of the revelations of that story, of this young girl who is the queen of a planet. Mm-hmm. And so it's really interesting to see these novels in the context of what we know about Padme in the films, what we learn about Padme in Clone Wars in the animated show, and then to sort of start to get all of this detailed information about her life, about Naboo, about the handmaidens, about the politics of the planet and how it relates to the galaxy. And so the novels are really quite wonderful, not only about filling in the gaps, but it's really interesting how they feel like small stories, like all the details, the daily life. I remember reading online something about the first novel, sort of like somebody was saying, nothing happens.
Yeah.
Nothing happens.
Yeah.
And, they're not incorrect. But at the same time, what we're getting is, what does it mean for a girl to be a queen? What does it mean for Padme to switch from being a queen to being a senator? What does it mean to live in a place that believes in monarchy and democracy at the same time? All of those little things that are sort of hinted at in the movies and are sort of hinted at in Clone Wars, these novels sort of flesh out all of those details, I think, in a really beautiful way.
And it's really, for anybody that's ever really turned off by the young adult, genre, really young adults we've said it multiple times and I've heard it said a lot online, is like young adult is not really for young adults. It's just about young people growing up into adults or coming into adulthood. And that's what all these books are really. Like you mentioned, we get a lot of information about the handmaidens. They're very big characters. And in the movies, they're just kind of in the background and they don't really do much.
True.
Movies, we get to learn what their roles are, why they're there, and how close they are with Padme. And I think that's really cool. And it's cool to see young women kind of sharing the same space and being supportive and positive with each other and growing up together. I really enjoyed that.
I remember when I first read Queen's Shadow, I went straight downstairs and watched Phantom Menace, because now I knew the names of all those handmaidens, and I'm sort of seeing things that I couldn't have seen because I didn't have the information of the novels. Mm-hmm. And so it sort of the novels gave a different layer to the movies, and it was just fun to sort of know a little more about them.
Yeah, they're really interesting characters too. They're all, they all kind of look like Padme or resemble her in some way to be like decoys, but they really all kind of are unique in their own way. They all have different skill sets or their own personalities that make them, why they brought them in to be like a part of her personal guard. And they all go into the kind of how they found them and met them. And I've enjoyed those things too.
Yes. For the people that have not read the novels, I just wanted to sort of set the timing for each of the novels. So Queen's Shadow is set right at the end of her reign, and when she slowly becomes the senator that we're going to see in the animated show, The Clone Wars. So it's sort of between the end of her reign and the beginning of being a senator. Queen's Peril, as I said, goes back in time. And so this is her becoming a queen. Like the novel actually starts in the elections. And then the Battle of Naboo and the occupation by the Trade Federation and all of that period. And then the last one, Queen's Hope, which just came out last year. Last year or this year? This year.
This year.
This year. I've read it so many times that it feels like I've had it for a long time. And then Queen's Hope actually starts with the marriage of Anakin and Padme. Mm-hmm. And it goes on from there. So this one is set really at the beginning of the Clone Wars. Yeah. At the very beginning of the Clone Wars. It's really awesome how it goes like here, then back in time, then forward in time. And they're not long, as you can see. They're not that long. They're very readable. I highly recommend the audiobooks.
Yeah.
I just finished reading them, listening to them 2 days ago. And it's the voice actor that does Padme in the Clone Wars.
Catherine Tabor is her name.
Catherine Tabor.
She's great.
She does a beautiful job.
It's really cool.
She does a beautiful job. Chancellor Palpatine shows up in the novels, and the voice of Chancellor Palpatine scares the shit out of me. It's just really sort of like, this guy's bad. This guy's bad news. So if you are into audiobooks, we highly recommend reading them that way.
And if you're a fan of the Clone Wars and like Padme, definitely give the books a chance. If you're not really much of a reader, I'd say that's a good entry point if you want to get to these stories.
Yes. I wanted to say something before we go into sort of details. I think what I find most remarkable about these novels is that they explore the power of femininity. Let me explain what I mean. Star Wars is full of badass women who are independent and assertive and strong. And Padme is part of that group.
All of those things, yeah.
But at the same time, one of the really interesting things about Padme Amidala, and this is something we see really well in Phantom Menace, is that she is using what we considered feminine things and makes them strong things, rather than delicate or, I was going to say, or feminine, because we have this tendency in the West to think of feminine as something delicate and something soft. Right. And so these novels are filled with I'm going to call it a strong femininity, where the use of makeup, the use of clothing, the use of the performance of femininity in their bodies is something that they use politically, culturally, socially, I think in really, really fascinating ways. I think this kernel is already in the movies, especially in Phantom Menace. But I love the way that EK Johnston takes that and runs with it in marvelous ways, in just really marvelous ways. And I think that's probably what I love most about these novels.
I was thinking about that actually when we talked about doing this episode a lot recently. And one thing I think I enjoy is the way that, like you said, that we have a perception that things that are feminine are soft and delicate and, passive maybe, but they use them to their advantage. They use that to their advantage to deceive enemies, to deceive, some of their allies, even to their advantage, and protect the queen and protect themselves. It shows that, just because something's feminine doesn't mean it can't be really badass or really cool, right? I think that's really interesting to see that in Star Wars. I don't know if we've really ever gotten that out of any other story, I've never seen it anywhere in Star Wars. So for it to be explored, it's cool.
Yes. And there are so many moments about, about knitting, about sewing, about braiding, about hairdos, about headpieces, all of these things that we tend to think as feminine, but we tend to dismiss them as feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And these novels sort of turn that around and make all of those feminine acts, or seen as feminine acts, and make them very powerful. And so I love the sort of intelligence that is connected to all of these activities that, at least in the West, we think of them as just feminine things that, sewing and knitting and all of that stuff, girls and effeminate boys do that.
Right.
And so the novels are constantly sort of turning that around and making us think about the work that is connected to it and the power that is connected to it.
I was going to say, as you as a cosplayer, I'm sure enjoyed those things, like the knitting and the sewing and kind of putting up a costume together. Like,
yes,
that's really, really big.
Yes,
it's all part of the appearance.
But it's interesting, in our social world, the cosplaying has so much to do about bringing a fiction character to life.
Mm-hmm.
And so in these novels, that's sort of what Padme is doing. She's sort of cosplaying these roles.
And the handmaidens too.
And the handmaidens too.
Yeah.
And sort of it's sort of like internal cosplay with all of these handmaidens and Padme sort of trying to perform someone else. And it's pretty marvelous. I really love this work.
Yeah, I think the handmaidens trying to kind of, when one of them is playing decoy for Padme, or Padme can't be at some event or at some meeting, they will send one of the handmaids to kind of fill in, and they do a really excellent job of kind of not only bringing Padme to life by her costume and by her looks, by her mannerisms, her features, her tics, kind of acting like her, like really putting on a performance. And that's really cool.
Yes,
something
absolutely.
I didn't really consider in the movies. I just assumed, they look like her, that, a lot of makeup and stuff. They're just going to assume it's her. But really getting her cadence down, or her vocal patterns, and
there's like voice training.
Yeah, they like
train each other. There's voice training. Yes.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Are we ready for spoilers?
I think so.
But we're going to say goodbye to the people that don't want to know more details about it.
Go read it,
and then go ahead and read it, and then come back, and watch the rest of the show.
Yeah.
Just mark this spot right here, and then join us when you have read them. And if you have read them, stay with us so we can talk about details. Are there specific scenes or moments that you particularly love in these books, Nick?
I know I mentioned it. It's my favorite, and I think it's really an interesting one that hasn't really been explored much in Star Wars. In the first book, Queen's Shadow, it's a transition between her becoming from queen to senator. And for those of you who don't know, the queen kind of represents the day-to-day life and works with the people of Naboo locally, and then the senator kind of represents them within the Galactic Senate, advocating for them and other planets in the sector. So we get really little snippets and the Clone Wars and stuff about the HoloNet and the news and the media, but to read that in the book about the media kind of questioning Padme, not really about her policies or her beliefs, but more about, she's very young. We've never had a senator this young go into the Senate. Could she do it? Then they're critiquing her about, her costumes, her outfits, her
Yep.
something she may have said that was kind of out of context.
Yes.
And I'm assuming the author EK Johnston kind of did that as like a commentary on our media and how we cover politicians and famous people in general. So I thought that was very interesting, especially because we get to see it from Padme's point of view about, the effects of that, how it affects her mentally and the repercussions she has to deal with and kind of navigating that life.
Those scenes in the novel that happens sort of throughout the novel. And so there's like little snippets of what you hear in the HoloNet that they're talking about Padme. In the audiobook, it's marvelous.
Oh wow.
Because
so it's like
the voice is like a gossip commentator. And so it's really, really fun to hear these things as sort of like a gossip columnist or like a gossip television show. Hearing the voice is sort of like, who is this girl? And she's trying to seduce us with her dresses, but can she think? And can she actually create policies? And it's in the audiobook, it's really quite delightful. I love in Queen's Carol, I think it is, there's a menstruation scene.
Oh yes.
One of the handmaidens, the youngest of all handmaidens, has her first period. And I think it's Captain Panaka that discovers her.
He's the head of the Naboo
and
security
so
force.
He's like slightly freaking out about, oh my God, what's going on in here? Which of course makes the handmaiden even more embarrassed about what has happened. And I think
in the book, doesn't he think it's like somebody attacked her? He doesn't realize. He doesn't realize it's her first menstruation.
And I think his wife Maria comes and sort of like, you get out of here. I will deal with this. You silly man.
Yeah, she basically was like, look, you're an idiot.
and those are the kinds of scenes that I sort of feel that are giving this sort of like the woman's story, the women's story to Star Wars that we almost never get. And these novels are so passionate about telling a woman's story that I, as a man who is not part of this, who is sort of experiencing everything from outside, was really quite beautiful and moving and powerful to sort of choose those details to put in the novel. I mean, I'm going to be really honest. If I had written a book about Padme Amidala, I would have never put a menstruation scene in a book. I just wouldn't have done it. And I thought it was just wonderful to have, such an important moment in a young woman's life as part of what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a woman in a public situation and dealing with men and dealing with women and all of that. I thought it was just great. Really great. And it's a small moment. I mean, it's not a whole chapter.
Half a chapter. It's like half a chapter.
It's half a chapter. But it really struck me that it was sort of part of it included in that. And it was just quite beautiful to have that in there. I really appreciated that.
Like you said,
if EK Johnston is listening to this, maybe someday she will. Thank you for doing that.
Well, I was going to say, as men, we would have never considered putting that in the book if we were given to write this book, because we don't. One, we've never experienced it. Two, this is something we don't think about all the time because never happened to us. But
yes,
that's why I appreciate that a woman was able to write this book and was able to convey those experiences in a genuine way. There have been times where men have tried to write women experiences, but it's a little problematic.
It's different. No, and it's I like it because also we get so many different experiences of women.
Yeah,
we have a beautiful same-sex lesbian relationship.
Yes.
I think it's Sasha and Yane. I'm sorry, I should have done my research.
Yes,
I think it's Sasha and Yane.
I think so too.
And it is done in it's just done in a beautiful way because it's just
mature way too.
It just happens. It just happens. They're attracted to each other, so they're attracted to each other. There's no sort of moment of sort of like, oh my God, what are you doing? Nothing.
Well, and all the other characters around them are like, okay,
That's exactly right.
They just accept it
It's
as
just
normal.
really there are just, and so there are all of these different stories that are sort of connected to different women experiences in this world of women with Padme and the handmaidens in all three novels. In
Mhm.
all three novels,
Mhm.
there is a, I think I'm using the right word in English, a harrowing scene of torture with one of the handmaidens during the Battle of Naboo
Mhm.
that it's really disturbing. It's very disturbing in the audiobook. I had to take a little moment after that scene. And so once again, this very important notion about violence against women during war. It's sort of inserted again in this book in a way that is both beautiful and powerful, and sort of reveals all of the different stories about women
Mhm.
that once again we barely get in Star Wars. Women and children are rarely tortured in Star Wars. It happens, but it always happens sort of from far
Off
away.
screen.
But here is it's quite disturbing. It's quite disturbing, and in a way, a very real event that happens very often in war.
Mhm.
The notion of rape and the notion of torture is something that happens way too often in spaces of war, and so it was. I was honored that it was included in there because it is yet another woman's experience that sort of should be part of Star Wars and hasn't really been part of Star Wars for the most part. There are exceptions here and there, but that one I will remember for a very long time. Another thing that I found really interesting in the novels, and this happens mostly in the second and third novel, although I think it's everywhere, is the presence of Palpatine in the novels.
Yes.
And once again, these novels are aware that we are reading knowing the story of the 9 movies, and especially knowing the story of the prequel trilogy. And so it's really quite wonderful to have that sort of notion of Palpatine as this specter that is paying attention and reacting to what Padme is doing as a queen, to what Padme is doing as a senator, to what Padme is advocating for and not advocating for. There is a whole plot about Padme wanting to do more about abolishing slavery in the galaxy, which for her is something that, after the Attack of the Clone scenes of Anakin's mother and all of that, is something that becomes an essential part of sort of the political project of Padme as a senator. And so it's really interesting how Palpatine is sort of everywhere. He keeps coming and going and coming and going. In the last novel, there are moments, it's really interesting how, I love the way she wrote it, where there are moments that are sections that it is always described as Darth Sidious, and other moments where it is described as Palpatine. We know they're the same person, but the books are narrated as if they are two different people. And I love that tension that we are sort of seeing the character of Darth Sidious and seeing the character of Palpatine narrated as two people, while we are aware that they are the same. It was so cool.
That is
It was
neat.
so cool. Actually, it was one of my favorite things of the latest book, Queen's Hope. How EK Johnston sort of treated and wrote and narrated Sidious and Palpatine as two different people, even though we know that they're the same person.
I remember when he showed up in the first one, and we know as soon as they said, "Oh, Chancellor Palpatine wants to come by and visit," and I'm like, "Oh, great." We know as the reader, but of course the characters don't have no idea.
Right.
It's very just tense. You're like, "Oh, is he going to be weird? Is he going to do something?" And in the first one, I'm sorry, no, it's the second one, Queen's Peril, kind of gives a lot of context for Phantom Menace, and you see him confronting Padme about the blockade, about the Trade Federation, and of course we know he wants her to sign the treaty, but he's going to her and saying, this is just unjust. You can't sign that treaty. It's just, and it's very manipulative, obviously.
Yes,
And it's
yes.
very unsettling at times.
No, I really love.
I enjoyed his inclusion because
I completely agree.
for those of you who don't know, he's from Naboo. He's a senator from Naboo, so
Right.
he has very strong connections, and he pops up often to kind of check in. And he kind of, in some of the later books, he kind of acts as an ally, like, you know, my friend, how are you doing? How are things on Naboo? You know, just checking in and being a good mentor.
Yes.
But it's very obviously very manipulative and very awful.
Yeah, there's I think it's in the last novel that Palpatine is constantly in contact with Panaka.
Yeah.
And he uses Panaka to sort of check on what's going on in Naboo.
Yes.
And it's an interesting way because Panaka has retired by now. Mariek's wife is the one sort of in charge. And so there's this sort of using Panaka as his communicating vessel of sort of knowing what's going on with all the details in Naboo.
I was going to give you a fun connection, actually. I don't know if you remember this. In Claudia Gray's novel, Leia, Princess of Alderaan, she goes to Naboo for like a relief mission, her and her mother. And
I had forgotten that.
Yes, Panaka is the Moff of Naboo during the Empire. At that time, he becomes the Moff of.
I had forgotten that.
Yes, and I just love how she included that in the book and kind of planting those seeds where we know where he ends up as a character later. And I just think that's really fun. I enjoyed that small connection.
Because of the connection with Palpatine.
Yeah. Palpatine, after the Clone Wars,
my God,
makes him the Moff, and I enjoy that because I like Panaka. He's an interesting character.
Yeah.
In these books too, he's also, we hadn't really mentioned him much, but he's one of the few male characters in this whole series. There's not a lot of male characters, but he's one of the few constant male characters. Yes. And he is very adamant. You know, Padme is more of a pacifist, and he's more adamant about let's build a bigger defense. Naboo, we don't want another situation with the Federation, and another invasion.
Yes.
He's very adamant about that. And then his conversations with Palpatine are, we need to beef up security. She's not doing this. It's a little too laxed around here. And then to see him become Moff later is like of course, that makes perfect sense.
I had forgotten that. That's awesome.
Palpatine knew. He's like, oh, I can use this guy. He'll be perfect in the future.
I could still hear you. my flying hand pulling out my earbuds. Nick, you wanted to talk about sort of these stories and these novels sort of in the context of comics and other books, and I would love for you to talk a little bit about that because it's sort of a fun connection as well.
Yeah, other than the connection I just mentioned, it just dawned on me when you mentioned Panaka, so I forgot about that. It ringed my bell. So, but yeah, there's a couple of fun ones. The Sabe, she survives the Clone Wars, and she ends up being alive around the original trilogy, and currently in the Darth Vader comic, she's a prominent character. She discovers that, one, she found out years ago that Anakin and Padme were married, and he became Vader. She knew that story, and then she also discovered they had a child. So she found out who Luke Skywalker was. So she's a regular character in the comics right now. And if you're
this is the Greg Pak series.
Greg Pak, yeah, it's currently going on.
Yeah.
And she's very prominent, very fun. I enjoy her a lot. She's older, obviously, and she's much more aggressive than she was when she was with Padme. So it's interesting to see her make that
transition. Her a lot in those comics.
She's very funny too.
Yeah.
She's one of the few characters that like stands up to Vader and is not scared or intimidated. I guess because she knows who he really is and can use that against him at any time. So that's a fun dynamic between those two. Plus, she looks like Padme, so it keeps messing with him. Like, oh my God, this looks like Padme.
I think at the end of the first issue,
she shows up.
Like Sabe shows up, and Vader says, "Padme."
He's like,
"That's the end of the issue."
Yeah, and I think if I'm remembering correctly, that comic started at the beginning of 2020, and it wasn't long after or before that the Queen Shadow had come out. So we really got to know Sabe a lot more.
Okay,
and then they kind of just inserted her in the comics. It was a quick little turnaround.
I love when Star Wars does that.
Oh, it's so cool.
It's so much fun.
So cool. And so it was, for those that didn't read the book, they're like, how the hell is Padme alive? And then the next issue, you find out and you're like, oh, that would make sense. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then another fun one that we read this book earlier this year. It came out around the same time, Queen's Hope, the last book in the trilogy. The writer, EK Johnston, also worked closely with Mike Chen, who wrote the recent Obi-Wan and Anakin novel, Brotherhood, which is also a very excellent read.
It's really good.
Really good. There's a lot of connections between these two books. They kind of overlap the same time period. So it takes place right after the marriage and right at the start of the Clone Wars. We'll see, I think there's a couple moments where we see scenes from the same scene, but from Anakin's point of view or Padme's point of view. And they're kind of, they venture off and do their own thing. And it's just interesting seeing the early things of their marriage, like, how are we going to make this work? We obviously can't just make this public and tell everyone we know, because it's a big no-no. Mike Chen, I watched an interview with him. I think it was on Star Wars Explained. And he explained that when he was writing the book, he was in touch with EK Johnston because he knew she was writing the book. And I think, well, from what it sounded like, they kind of did this on their own, just reached out to each other. And he's like, I'm having Anakin meet Padme in this scene. What is she wearing? Like, what's her costume at the time? Wow. At the time of this, at the time this time period, I wanted to make it as accurate as I can. Kind of describe to me, or let me know what she's doing, so I can make it as believable. Fun. I was like, that's really incredible and awesome attention to detail. So I'm really glad.
Very thoughtful. Very thoughtful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Not wanting to step over her toes and vice versa. They're trying to like make it work, and that's cool. You can tell they're both really big fans of these characters, so they want to make it as believable as possible.
I love that.
Yeah.
Something that I forgot to mention before our spoilers is that one of the fun things about Queen's Peril, which is said at the sort of the beginning of the reign of Padme, is that we get to meet every single handmaiden.
Yes.
And who they are, where they came from, and how they are hired by Panaka to be part of the handmaiden. So the whole idea of having a whole set of handmaidens, and that each handmaiden would have a different skill that would be sort of part of this team, Team Padme or Team Amidala. That is another really awesome thing to see. And I think part of why I think it's my favorite, because it's really fun to see the genesis.
Yeah, the start
of these handmaidens, and where they come from and who they are, and their personalities, because in the movies they all look like the same person.
And some of them don't even speak.
Right. And most of them don't speak.
Yeah.
And so it was really fun in the second novel to sort of get the sense of these people as individual, all these women as individuals.
I rewatched Attack of the Clones this year because it was the 20-year anniversary, and it was after I read these books. And the opening scene is with one of her handmaidens getting assassinated, Dorme.
Correct.
And they said her name originally when the movie came out. I didn't think nothing of it at the time, and even until I read the books. But after she said the name, and I thought, oh no, I liked her. She was very interesting.
And in Queen's Hope, there's a constant sort of reminder about
her death. Right. It's still fresh.
Yes, because it's fresh. That's exactly right.
It just happened. And another thing we didn't mention about Queen Shadow is, as we mentioned, that she's kind of going from queen to senator. That means their life, she's going to be on Coruscant more. They all kind of, you can tell they're kind of like in a transition phase in their life. Not only are they getting older, but like they're all wanting to do things. Like Padme is going to be senator. One of them wants to go back to school and become an artist. One wants to go, become a famous musician. Like they all kind of like, well, this part of our life's over. We kind of want to do something new. And it's kind of, they still keep in contact, but it's obviously just a different phase of their life. And we get new members of the handmaids that get added.
Yes, there's a whole wave of them. But yeah.
Yeah, so there's like new members, and one of them was in the Clone Wars. I forget her name. We watched it recently, but
interesting.
Yeah, they said her name in the Clone Wars. I was like, oh, I remember her when she got added in the book. So
okay.
I love the attention to detail in these books.
Yes, without having to be 600 pages long.
Right, and
I like that too.
Very efficient.
Any other thoughts?
No, I think I would just encourage people to read these books. If you watch this long, hopefully you've read them, but because you got spoiled a lot. But if you haven't, you just didn't care, go out, read them somehow. Local libraries, digital if you can. Audiobooks are very good.
No, I highly recommend them.
If you're a fan of Padme, you would love them.
I remember early when I met you, you said these novels are, I can't remember exactly the phrase that you said, but they're sort of doing justice
Yeah.
to the complexity of who she is,
Right.
sort of adding more layers to a fascinating character.
What I meant by that is I felt personally that she was great in episode 1 and 2, and then Revenge of the Sith, I thought she was kind of a lot going on in that movie. Obviously, not every character is going to get a character arc or even fleshed out, and a lot of her scenes were deleted and kind of cut and had to be cut. And I kind of understand it, but also kind of felt like it was a disservice to the character you'd set up in the first two films. Ultimately, it wasn't her story, but I just felt she was kind of sidelined and just used as a plot device. And then these books, I really felt like, we really get to know who she is, what makes her tick.
Front and center.
Yeah, we get to know what she believes in, why she believes in certain things, and I didn't even get to figure out really why she loves Anakin, because I know a lot of people were like, why would you love this man? He's very toxic and very problematic. And they even talk about that. Her and the handmaidens, the ones that figure out the marriage, they're like kind of being good friends and like confronting her, like, are you sure about this? Like, it's
the
cool.
wonderful scene in that last book where Padme is somewhere else and somebody and
I think it's Sabe.
I think it's Sabe. And so Sabe is being the senator while Padme is on a mission. And Anakin shows up in the room.
Oh, yes.
In the middle of the night.
And he's like, oh.
To go see his wife. And he's like, who are you?
You're not my wife.
What have you done to Padme? It's a
that's
wonderful scene.
It's pretty funny. That's kind of how she finds out.
Wonderful scene.
That's how she finds out, like,
that's exactly right.
Why do you have this Jedi kind of showing up in the middle of the night? That's not normal.
EK Johnston, wherever you are, thank you.
Hope you're watching.
I hope you're watching. Yes. Maybe I can find her somewhere and maybe I can send her a message on Instagram and just send her the link.
That'd be cool.
Doesn't hurt, right? Doesn't hurt.
That'd be nice.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, audience. May the force be with you all. And we'll see you on the next one.